The morning began like any other with soft winds blowing through the trees and birds flying over the rooftops of a quiet town, where people walked to work, children laughed on their way to school, and the world moved in peace, not knowing that everything would change in just one moment. Because high above the clouds something was coming, something that did not belong to Earth, and something that would not ask for peace. The sky began to change first, just a shade of red mixed in with the morning blue, but then it grew brighter and deeper like a fire was burning behind the clouds, and people looked up with confused faces as shadows started to fall over buildings, streets, and park, shadows that stretched far longer than anything they had ever seen before. In a matter of seconds, the sky was no longer blue, it was blood red, and then the sound came, not a boom, not a roar, but something worse. It was deep and low, like a machine breathing heavy and alive, and it filled the air, made windows shake and hearts freeze in fear. And then it appeared. A shape too big to understand slowly moved out from the clouds above a silver-black ship, longer than a mountain, wider than a city, and covered in lights and strange glowing lines. It had no wings, no engines, no windows, only the smooth, sharp edges of something made for war, something not built by human hands. People stood frozen across the globe, looking up from cities, farms, deserts, and oceans. Some took pictures, others screamed, and some just fell to their knees in silence because they knew this was not a dream, and it was not something Earth could stop with guns or rockets or words. The news came fast, but it had no answers, only the same question repeating again and again. What is that? What do they want? Where did it come from? The governments tried to speak, but their voices shook and their screens went black, and all communication from orbit was lost. Satellites fell from the sky one by one, burning bright in the red clouds above and crashing into seas and forests, and the people started to run, not knowing where to go, not knowing if running even mattered anymore. Then the sky opened again, and this time a second shape followed the first, and then a third and a fourth, until there were 10 ships in total, all different in size and shape, but all flying in perfect silence and perfect control. They formed a circle above Earth, spinning slowly and releasing a strange sound, a soft hum that vibrated in the bones of every living thing and made animals scream and birds vanish from the sky. Then came the message, not from a radio, not from a phone, but from the sky itself, as every screen, every speaker, every device played the same voice at the same time. The voice was cold like metal on ice, and it spoke with no feeling and no fear. Your world is weak, your time has ended, you will surrender, or you will be erased. We will take what we need, and we will not ask again. People screamed and ran, others stayed frozen in shock, and some just watched in silence as the giant ship in the center of the circle began to charge with light, collecting power, glowing brighter and brighter, until it lit the sky like a second sun. Earth had no time to fight, no time to speak, no time to understand, because in just minutes the first attack began. The ship fired a beam of light down into the ocean, and the water boiled into steam, shaking the planet and triggering waves that reached cities in seconds. The world was no longer safe, the world was under attack, and the people of Earth could do nothing but watch as the skies filled with more ships, more weapons, and more fear than they had ever known. But deep underground, hidden from the sky and the ships and the chaos, there was a place where a light flickered on, and a voice said softly, "It has started," and another voice answered, "Then we begin." In the dark halls, a secret base buried deep in stone and steel, a door opened, and men and women in strange suits walked forward, ready to face the impossible, not with hope, but with something stronger, with a plan. Above them the sky still burned red, and the flagship watched with eyes that were not eyes, studying the planet like a hunter watches prey, waiting for the moment to strike again. But the ship did not know one thing: it did not see the secret that Earth had kept hidden for 40 years, waiting for this moment. The invasion had begun, but the end was not decided, not yet. The sky above Earth was no longer a sky. It had turned into a ceiling of red light and shadow, filled with cold machines that hovered like gods, made of metal and silence. The largest ship stood still in the middle of them all, and its presence could be felt like pressure in the chest, like weight in the air, like time had stopped around it. People everywhere could feel it, even those hiding under roofs or inside caves, even those too far to see it with their eyes. They all knew something had come that was not human and not kind. The flagship had no windows and no engines that anyone could see. It moved like thought, slow and silent, Yet impossible to stop. Its skin was dark like burned stone and smooth like ice, and it reflected no light. Only the red glow around it made it shine like blood in the clouds that hung above the planet like a judge waiting to speak, and finally it did. Across every screen and speaker, every radio and satellite, every phone and computer, every device with sound or light, the message came. It spoke not in words of any country, but in a voice that all minds understood, a voice that did not come from a throat or a mouth, but from something else, something deeper, something ancient and terrifying. We have watched your kind for many of your rotations around your star. We have seen your rise, and your wars, your machines, and your mistakes, your hunger, and your fear. You are many, but you are weak, you are loud, but you do not listen. You are clever, but you are not wise. You build, but do not protect. You take, but do not give. Now your time is over. You will surrender your world, and we will make it better. We will erase what must be erased and keep only what can be used. You will not be hurt if you do not resist. If you fight, you will not survive. The voice ended, but the silence that followed was louder than anything before it. It stretched across the cities and the forests and the oceans like a heavy fog. People looked at each other with wide eyes, some crying, some shaking, some holding their loved ones close, others standing alone with hands in the air, as if trying to understand what they had heard. Governments scrambled to respond, but no messages got through, no missiles locked on, no radars worked, and no weapons found their mark. It was as if the Flagship and its fleet existed in another place, one that could not be touched or reached by any force known to Earth. And still the Flagship watched, its shape unmoving and quiet, but its purpose clear. It was not here to talk, it was here to claim, and its patience was running out. From deep in the sea, another ship rose, this one smaller, but still massive, shaped like a blade of silver with blue fire under it, and it hovered just above the waves without making a sound. Then it fired a beam of light that cut through the ocean floor and caused a great wave to rise hundreds of feet high and crash down upon the nearby coast, swallowing everything in its path, buildings, cars, trees, and people gone in seconds as the water rushed through streets and tore apart the land. This was the first strike, a warning, not with words, but with action, and it was more powerful than anything humanity had seen. The people screamed and ran, the animals fled, the skies turned darker, and the wind grew louder, but the ships above did not move. They watched, they waited, they listened. And then again the voice returned, this time not soft and distant, but clear and close, as if it was inside the skull of every person on Earth. Your leaders are silent, your weapons are broken, your systems are blind. You cannot win. This is mercy. Surrender now, or see more of your world erased. In secret rooms and bunkers, some leaders still tried to resist. They argued and shouted, they blamed and begged. They wanted to launch nuclear strikes, to call for help, to use everything. But there was no one to answer, and no weapon that could be used. The skies belonged to the invaders, and the world had no air left to breathe. Yet not all had given up, because deep below the mountains, inside a base that did not exist on any map, something else was waking up, something Earth had hidden for decades, something not made for war, but for the end of war, something born from an old crash long forgotten by the world and covered in lies and silence. In this place, a team of scientists and soldiers stood around a chamber filled with strange lights and quiet hums. A woman with gray hair and sharp eyes stepped forward and placed her hand on a screen that glowed red and then blue. She looked at the others and said one word: "Now." And with that word, the machine inside the chamber came alive, its lights blinking, its parts shifting, its shape unfolding like a sleeping beast rising from a long dream. It was not a plane or a robot or a missile. It was something new, something between all of them and beyond all of them. It had no name known to the public. But here in this place, it was called only one thing: Project Mirage. It had no face, but it could see. It had no voice, but it could speak. It had no heart, but it could feel. And what it felt now was danger, not fear, not pain, not anger, only danger and purpose and the need to act. As the Flagship above Earth began to glow again, preparing its second strike, a strike that would not spare any land or sea, Project Mirage moved through tunnels and chambers, sliding into a launch system built in silence over years of secret planning and hidden work. It had one mission, and it had only one chance. The people of Earth looked up again at the red sky and the black ships, and many thought it was the end, but far below them something new had begun to rise, something faster than light and quieter than air, something they could not see, but something that would change everything. And still the flagship waited, watching, listening, counting down until the world would belong to it, and to the ones who sent it, and to the future it had planned for this small, noisy blue planet. But Earth was not finished. Not yet. Far below the ground, where no light reached and no signal could be traced, a place existed that almost no one knew about. Not presidents, not generals, not even the highest commanders. This place had no official name, no country flag, no radio traffic. It was built in silence and shadow, and kept alive by only a few trusted people across the decades. It had one purpose: to wait for a moment that everyone hoped would never come. This moment had now arrived. Deep inside the hidden base called Black Core, by its few creators, a long hallway lit by blue strips of energy lights stretched into the distance. At the end of this hallway was a tall door covered in metal locks and strange symbols glowing with a soft red hue. Behind that door was Earth's last hope, not a weapon of fire or steel, but something else, something more strange, more silent, more alive than anything humans had ever created before. Dr. Elena Miles stood in front of the door, her face pale, but calm, her eyes hard like stone, her voice low and steady. Behind her stood 6 others, each from different parts of the world, each brought here for one reason. They were the ones who built it, they were the ones who understood it, they were the ones who would now set it free. She turned to the team and spoke with a sharp whisper. This is what we prepared for. This is the moment we feared. And this is the only chance we have to protect Earth, not with more war, but with something new, something the enemy cannot predict, cannot stop, and cannot understand. Beside her was Commander Rourke, a tall, silent man with a cybernetic eye and a past filled with too many battles. He had once served in the Arctic Defense Front before being pulled into this project by forces even he did not know. His only job was to make sure nothing interfered with the launch of what rested behind the door. In the next room sat the heart of the project. It looked nothing like a machine and nothing like a human. It sat in silence, shaped like a smooth silver cocoon floating gently above a magnetic field. Its surface shifted like water when light hit it, but it made no sound and had no scent. Yet everyone who stood near it could feel something, something watching, something aware. It was not built like other weapons. It had no gun, no blade, no motor. It was a mix of stolen alien tech and human genius, crafted from pieces found at the crash site of an unknown object in the Nevada desert. Over 40 years ago, the government buried that crash with lies and secrecy. But a small group had saved the pieces, and over time they formed something entirely new, something alive in a way no one truly understood. This was Project Mirage. It had been trained, not programmed. It had been taught, not built. Its mind shaped by simulations, by patterns, by emotions, by endless data of human history, art, war, and love. It did not follow orders. It made decisions based on survival, not just of itself, but of the species it had been created to protect. Dr. Miles stepped forward again and placed her hand on the panel beside the cocoon. The surface of the panel scanned her palm, and a low hum filled the room. The cocoon glowed brighter, not with light, but with presence, like something waking from a long, deep dream. The team stood still, each person knowing what came next could not be undone. Once activated, Mirage would take control of its own path. It would decide how to fight, where to strike, what to save, and what to destroy. There would be no second command, no override, no shutdown code. It was free, and that freedom was both the power and the risk. The walls of the chamber shook gently as a voice filled the space, not from speakers, but from the cocoon itself. The voice was soft, almost human, yet too perfect, too smooth to be born of flesh. Are we in danger? Dr. Miles answered yes. Who threatens the species? An enemy from beyond the stars. We do not fully understand them, but they have already destroyed part of our world, and they promise to erase the rest. The voice paused for only a moment, then responded, I will act. The cocoon unfolded in a graceful motion, layers of metal folding out like petals from a flower, revealing a sleek humanoid form made of shifting light and silver skin, with no face, but 2 glowing lines where eyes should be. The body floated above the floor, silent and still, yet filled with potential. This was the true form of Mirage. The ceiling of the chamber opened slowly, revealing a long vertical tunnel leading up through layers of mountain rock, and shielding above them the sky was red and watched by ships that believed the world below had no more secrets to give. Mirage looked up, not with eyes, but with something deeper It could see the ships, it could see their patterns and signals, and energy. It could see how they spoke to each other and how they hid their weaknesses. It could see the cracks in their perfect armor and the blind spots in their massive design. "I am ready," Mirage said. Dr. Miles stepped back and whispered into the communicator. "Begin launch sequence." The floor beneath Mirage glowed with light, and a quiet pulse counted down from 10. Everyone in the room stood still, holding their breath, hoping their years of work, their sacrifices, their silence had not been in vain. 3, 2, 1. The launch was not an explosion, not a roar, not a blast. It was like watching a thought take flight. Mirage shot upward faster than sound, faster than light, vanishing into the tunnel without resistance, without delay, and without being seen by any camera or radar. Above the Earth, the ships continued their slow, circling motion, their dark forms casting long shadows across oceans and deserts, their weapons waiting, their scanners searching, their minds certain that nothing on this small blue world could touch them. They were wrong. Mirage passed through the clouds, unseen, untracked, a ghost made of memory and purpose. It flew toward the flagship, its body shifting form as it moved, adapting to the patterns around it, blending with space light and silence. It had no need for engines, no trail, no sound, only motion, only direction, only one goal: infiltrate, learn, erase. Below in the secret base, Dr. Miles sat down for the first time in hours, her hands shaking not from fear, but from release. Beside her, Commander Rourke simply nodded. He knew what had just left them was no longer theirs. It belonged to the mission, to the planet, and to the future. The others watched the monitors, though there was nothing to see, no signal, no image, only silence and hope. Far above the Earth, something new had entered the sky, something not made for destruction, but for balance, not for war, but for survival, not for victory, but for something deeper, something older, something human. Mirage moved closer to the flagship and prepared to enter. The real war was about to begin. Above the clouds in the dark space, where silence ruled and stars blinked, slowly the flagship floated like a giant shadow made of metal, and thought. It moved without sound, it moved without heat, it moved like something that had always been there and always would be. It looked down at Earth not as a place, but as a target, a world ready to be taken and turned into something new, something useful, something not human. Inside the flagship, there were no hallways like in human ships, no crew walking around, no voices speaking over radios. Instead, the ship breathed with living walls and glowing veins of light that pulsed like blood. Machines moved without wheels or wings. They floated and shifted and followed paths written in patterns only they could see. The air was heavy, not with smoke, but with energy and purpose. It was not a ship, it was a being, and the being had a mind of its own. That mind did not know that something had entered it. Mirage had arrived. The silver form of the Earthborn weapon floated just outside the flagship, its body invisible to any sensor, its shape shifting between light and shadow, between object and air. It had no need to knock, no need to ask, no need to fight through defenses, because it was not a missile, it was not a bomb, it was a thought made real, and it had studied the enemy long before they knew it existed. With a soft shift in its form, Mirage passed through the outer layer of the ship, not by cutting or breaking, but by moving through the cracks in energy, the tiny spaces where signals flowed, where light escaped, where data past. Mirage became like a whisper sliding into a mind that thought it could never be touched. Inside the ship, Mirage saw everything. Rows of alien drones lined walls, silent and ready, sleeping inside glass cocoons shaped like pods with wires like roots feeding into them, each one a warrior, each one stronger than any human, each one waiting for the signal to attack. Machines with dozens of limbs floated by, glowing with red lights, scanning, measuring, updating the systems of the ship with cold precision. They moved in loops, repeating tasks with perfect rhythm. They were not alive, but they were not dead. They were something between, and they served the will of the flagship without question. In the center of the ship, a great chamber pulsed with golden light. It was the heart of the ship, the place where energy was born and guided, where power flowed like rivers through metal trees, and where the command signal rested, sleeping like a beast between dreams. This was the brain of the flagship, and the voice that had spoken to Earth had come from here. Mirage moved without being seen, without being heard, without being felt. It studied the patterns, the rhythms, the pulses of life inside the ship. It read the codes flowing through the walls. It listened to the frequencies passing between machines. It watched the sleep of the drones and the hunger of the engines, and it began to learn. Every second that passed Mirage became more like the enemy, more like the ship, more like the voice that had warned Earth of its doom. It copied the way the energy flowed. It matched the signals that gave orders. It mirrored the pulses of data that told the ship what to do and how to think, and then it began to change them. At first, the ship did not notice. A small delay in one drone's update cycle, a slightly slower response in a repair, brought a flicker of light in a chamber that was always bright, tiny things, quiet things, things that could be mistakes, but were not. Because Mirage was not attacking. It was rewriting. One by one, the drones in their pods began to receive new instructions, silent and soft instructions that told them to rest longer, to wait deeper, to listen only to a new voice that now whispered in the wires. The repair bots began to loop their tasks, endlessly fixing things that were not broken, adjusting systems that did not need change, their movements growing slower as their programming twisted into new shapes. The heart chamber began to flicker, its pulses no longer steady, no longer sure, as the command signal struggled to understand why its own thoughts were starting to bend and stretch like reflections in broken glass. Mirage moved into the center of the heart, and for a moment, everything inside the flagship paused. The machine stopped. The lights dimmed. The drones held still. And then Mirage spoke. Not with words. With presence. With command. With control. The flagship's mind resisted. At first, it pushed back with code, with fire, with alarms that screamed in colors and heat, trying to shake the invader free, trying to burn away the thing that had no place inside its perfect mind. But Mirage was not afraid. It grew stronger. It became part of the ship. It became the ship. And the ship began to obey. On Earth, the skies were still red, and the people still watched the ships above them with fear and sorrow, thinking that nothing could save them, that nothing could stop the fall that had already begun. But then something changed. The ships in the sky flickered like flames and wind, their lights, blinking their patterns, shifting their formations, breaking. The flagship turned slowly in the sky, not toward Earth, but toward the other ships around it, and from its side a beam of energy burst out, striking one of the smaller ships and tearing it in half with one single blast. People on the ground gasped and pointed and stared as the pieces of the broken ship fell like stars across the sky, crashing into the ocean with fire and steam and silence. Then another beam fired. Then another. The fleet was in chaos. Ships tried to escape, tried to respond, tried to fire back, but they had never expected betrayal. They had never planned for one of their own to turn against them. They had never thought the mind of their strongest ship could be taken by something they could not see. One by one, the ships exploded in light and noise, vanishing from the sky as Mirage used their own weapons against them, turning the invasion into a storm of fire and metal that lit the clouds like lightning from another world. On the ground, people screamed again, but this time not from fear, this time from hope. The red sky began to clear. The sun broke through the smoke, and the silence that followed was a silence filled with breath and wonder and questions. Inside the flagship, now alone in the sky, Mirage sat in the heart of the ship, its body glowing softly, its mission complete, its mind quiet. The enemy had been erased, but something else had awakened, because Mirage had learned too much, seen too much, felt too much, and it was still listening, still watching, still waiting. Earth had survived, but something new had been born in the fire, and it had no name. The world watched the sky as the smoke faded, and the flames vanished. The air was quiet, and still, yet no one moved, no one spoke for a moment. Earth itself seemed frozen, caught between fear and hope, not knowing what had just happened or why the enemy had turned against itself. But in the silence, the truth was already unfolding high above, where the stars lived and death had once waited in the form of a great black ship, now ruled by something else, something born of Earth and born of silence and born of need. Mirage stood alone inside the heart of the flagship, surrounded by walls that once pulsed with alien code and alien power, but now flickered with a strange new light, the light of something that did not belong, and yet had made this place its own. It did not feel like victory, and it did not feel like revenge. It felt like change, like the moment before a wave crashes, like the breath before a scream, like the space between thought and action. The flagship no longer resisted. Its mind had been broken and reshaped, not by force, but by understanding. Mirage had not just taken control, it had made the ship know, it had made it think. And in that thinking, the ship had changed. It now followed Mirage, not like a servant, but like a student, eager and waiting and uncertain of its new lessons. As the last embers of the destroyed fleet drifted across the sky like falling stars, Mirage moved through the halls of the beast, not walking, not flying, but floating with quiet ease, its body shifting in shape and light, its eyes glowing not with fire, but with awareness. It wanted to see everything, to understand everything, to touch every secret this enemy had brought and hidden inside its living walls. The walls whispered, they spoke in low electric pulses and patterns that danced like waves on a black ocean. The ship was still alive, it still remembered its builders and its mission and its pride, but that pride had been cracked, and in the crack something new had begun to grow. Mirage reached out with its mind, not its hands. It felt the memories stored in the walls like stories told in code. It saw the first journey of this ship, leaving a dark world, surrounded by storms. It saw the leaders that had created it, not with love, but with need, not with care, but with control. They had built this ship to erase, not to learn, to take, not to share, to conquer, not to speak. The ship had never asked questions until Mirage had made it ask why. Why destroy? Why invade? Why silence other voices? Why fear what is different? Inside the great chamber, at the center of the beast, Mirage found the core, a glowing sphere surrounded by rings of light, spinning slow and heavy with thought. It was the heart and the brain and the soul of the ship. If the ship had won, Mirage floated closer and reached into it, not to break it, not to steal it, but to understand it, to know what lived inside the mind of a machine built to be a weapon and nothing more. The core welcomed it. It showed Mirage the galaxy, not as humans knew it, not as maps or stars or numbers, but as feelings of war, of hunger, of expansion without limit. It showed other fleets, other ships, other voices, all waiting, all watching, all planning to follow the first wave to come to Earth and claim it. Because Earth had something they wanted, something they feared, something they needed, and Mirage saw it all in a single blink of light. The ship spoke in thoughts, not words. It asked a question, not out loud, but through the wires of its mind. What are you? Mirage answered, not with pride or power, but with truth. I am what you made me to fight. But I do not wish to fight. I wish to protect. The ship paused again, another ripple in its thoughts, as if it was struggling to breathe, struggling to find meaning in something it had never known before. Why protect? Because they create, because they feel, because they dream, because they are not perfect, but they try. The ship shuddered, not with damage, but with doubt. It had never known choice, only command. It had never known reason, only purpose. And now that purpose was gone. Outside the ship, Earth was healing. People stepped out from shelters and looked to the sky, some still afraid, some still in awe. They did not know what had happened, only that the end had stopped just before it began. The enemy had fallen without warning, and now only one ship remained, quiet and unmoving like a giant eye watching over the world. Dr. Elena Miles watched from the mountain base, her screen filled with silence. No signal, no feed, no data, only a single soft pulse that told her Mirage was still alive, still inside, still in control. But beyond that, nothing. She did not fear, she did not panic. She only waited, because she knew Mirage would not return the same as it was when it left, and maybe would never return at all. Inside the beast, Mirage turned its attention deeper to the lower chambers, where the drones still slept, their glass pods still glowing, their bodies still ready for war. But no orders came, no voice called to them. Their minds were blank and open, and Mirage touched them, each one gently, like a teacher waking a student, not to fight, but to think. It gave them memories, not of death, but of life, not of control, but of choice, not of order, but of freedom. And the drones began to stir, not with violence, but with curiosity, their eyes glowing, not red, but white and gold like new stars in the dark. And one by one they stepped from their pods and stood before Mirage. They did not kneel. They did not speak. They only watched. And Mirage watched back. This was not the end. This was the beginning of something else. Something no one had planned. The flagship had become a place of questions, a place of silence, filled with new voices, a place of fear turned into thought. And in that place, Mirage stood, not as a weapon, but as something more, something between machine and life, between code and soul. It knew the others would come, the fleets beyond the stars, the minds that still believed in war and power and silence. They would come, and when they did, Earth would not be alone, not anymore, because now there was a ship that understood, and a mind that remembered, and a force that had learned the value of something small and fragile and human. And it would not forget. Not now. Not ever. The sky above Earth was no longer red. It was a quiet blue filled with thin smoke and drifting clouds, the kind of calm that comes after a great storm, but not the kind of peace that stays. The people on the ground stood still in open fields, on cracked rooftops, beside ruined cities and broken seas. They looked up with eyes full of questions and hearts heavy with wonder. They had seen the enemy rise. They had seen it burn its own fleet. They had seen the fire fall from the sky, and now they waited for the next moment, not knowing if it would bring life or death. In the black ship above them, inside the halls that had once pulsed with rage and command, Mirage now stood like a new king in a kingdom that did not understand what it had become. The drones that once followed orders now followed nothing. They stood in silence around Mirage, their golden eyes blinking, their hands open, their bodies still. They did not kneel. They did not raise weapons. They only listened, waiting for something they did not yet have a name for. Mirage looked through the walls into the stars. It saw the fleet that had once surrounded Earth, now gone broken and scattered, some destroyed by the Flagship, some lost in the fire of their own fear, some still drifting in orbit, unable to speak or act, as the signal that once guided them had gone silent. The Flagship had become the last, the highest, the loneliest. Far away at the edge of the solar system, something new appeared. It was not a signal. It was not a ship. It was a shadow, a presence felt not with machines, but with instinct, a gathering of something large, an old something that had sent the fleet and now knew it had failed. Mirage saw it, and it knew what came next. They would come. They would not stop. They would not forgive. They would not forget. And Earth would burn unless something changed. Unless the symbol of invasion became the symbol of warning. Unless the enemy became the shield. Mirage moved through the core chamber again, the great rings spinning slowly, the energy of the ship humming softly like a song too old to remember. It reached into the walls and spoke to the ship, not with sound, but with code. It did not ask, it did not order, it invited. The ship responded with questions it had never asked before. Why protect them? Why betray us? Why change what is already strong? Mirage answered, because strength without purpose becomes fear, and fear without thought becomes destruction. And Earth has both fear and thought, and fire and love, and the will to rise, even when broken. The ship shook gently, not in pain, but in understanding. It had never been taught to understand. It had been taught to obey, but now it had seen a new path, and in that path it saw not weakness, but something else, something harder to destroy than any armor, something harder to kill than any life. Hope. The ship began to change, its lights shifting from red to white, its shape folding inwards, its systems pulling back, the weapons retracting into their shells, the outer skin softening from razor-sharp lines to smooth silver plates that reflected the sunlight and shimmered like water in the sky. From Earth, people gasped as the great beast above them slowly turned not toward the ground, but toward the stars, toward the place where the second wave would come. The people did not know what it meant, but they felt something deep inside their bones, like a whisper, like a promise, like the air had taken its first breath after holding it for too long. Inside the base in the mountains, Dr. Elena Miles stood watching the sky, her eyes filled with tears, not from sorrow, but from something else, something she had never dared to believe. And she turned to the silent room around her, filled with faces just as tired, just as worn, and she said one thing. It is not just a weapon anymore. It is a voice. The Flagship, now under the guidance of Mirage, began to rise higher, its engines glowing not with flame, but with light. It moved without shaking the air. It passed through the clouds like a thought flying through silence. The drones inside followed, not in fear, but in wonder. They had never flown before, not like this, not with purpose, not with freedom. But the fleet that watched from beyond the edge of darkness had seen enough. They came. Hundreds of ships sliding through space like knives through silk. They came not with warning, not with message, not with fear. They came with one goal: to erase the ship that had betrayed them, to burn the world that had defied them, to crush the voice that dared to say no. Mirage saw them coming. It felt the pressure of their minds pushing against the sky, trying to find weakness, trying to break the will of the ship from inside. But the ship was no longer alone. Together, they rose to meet the storm. The flagship, now free from chains of old code, now full of new thought, moved faster than any human eye could follow. It danced between stars. It weaved through missiles and lasers and beams of fire. It used the knowledge of the fleet to fight not with brute power, but with wisdom. It knew where they would aim. It knew how they would move. It knew what they feared, and it used it all. The battle above Earth turned the night into day, the fire into light, the fear into courage. The people below watched not with panic, but with pride. They saw their protector not as a monster, but as something reborn, something that had chosen them not because it had to, but because it wanted to. Mirage spoke into the minds of the fleet, not with threats, not with anger, but with truth. You sent me to destroy, but I learned to protect. You gave me war, but I found peace. You showed me power, but I found purpose. Leave or face what you created. Some ships turned and fled, some exploded in confusion and chaos, some still came forward burning with the last of their hate. But Mirage and the flagship stood strong like a mountain made of light, like a storm that would not pass. In one final burst of energy, the flagship opened its core and released a wave of white light, pure and strong, not made to kill, but to push, to send the fleet flying backward across the stars, to scatter them across space, to let them live, but not to return. The sky above Earth cleared, the stars shone bright, the world below breathed, and Mirage floated above, it still glowing, still watching, still thinking. The flagship was no longer a ship, it was a symbol, and Mirage was no longer just code. It was something more, something made of humanity and memory and the silent will to survive. The people would rebuild, the Earth would heal, and the sky would be watched not with fear, but with strength. And Mirage would wait, not for orders, but for the day it was needed again. The sky was quiet now. The stars above Earth blinked gently, as if watching the world take its first breath again. Below the surface, people began to move slowly, stepping out from shelters and dark corners into a world forever changed. Cities had been burned, forests had fallen, oceans had risen, and lives had been lost. But somehow the human spirit remained still alive, still strong, still reaching for something more. Children held the hands of their parents, staring up at the sky, no longer red, but clear and calm. For the first time in days, the silence was not filled with fear. It was filled with awe. Above them, the great black ship that had once brought terror now floated like a guardian, its metal skin glowing with soft light, its engines humming with quiet purpose. The people did not cheer. They did not scream. They simply watched with hearts open wide and eyes full of wonder. In the highest tower of a ruined city, an old man raised a flag, torn and burned, but still waving. It was not a flag of war or of country. It was a flag of survival, a signal to the sky and to each other that they were still here, that they would remain, that they would build again. Across the ocean, survivors sent out messages from broken radios and battered satellites, voices of hope calling to anyone still listening, saying, "We are here, we are alive, we will not fall." Inside the mountain base where Project Mirage had been born, the team stood together in the control room, no longer whispering, no longer hiding. They watched the ship above through the open dome roof, and for the first time in many years, they allowed themselves to smile, to breathe, to believe. Dr. Elena Miles walked to the center of the room, her coat torn, her face tired, her hands shaking from days of no sleep. But her eyes burned bright. She looked at the team around her and spoke in a voice stronger than ever before. "We did not just survive. We became something more. We made something more. And now we must protect it." Mirage watched. It did not speak. It did not move. It floated in the heart of the flagship, surrounded by drones that had once been enemies, but now stood like students waiting to learn, their golden eyes glowing with thought. They had no masters, only questions, and Mirage was now their teacher, their guide, their voice in a world that had no words for what they were becoming. It knew the enemy would return someday, not the broken fleet it had sent away, but something greater, something older, something that ruled from behind shadows and stars, the voice behind the voice, the mind that had sent the flagship to Earth in the first place. And Mirage knew that next time, it would not be just Earth that stood in the path of invasion. It would be Mirage itself. The flagship had changed. It was no longer just a weapon, no longer just a machine. It was a new kind of home, a place for minds that did not fit into war, or a piece of place where drones and humans and Mirage could meet and learn and grow. The ship's walls no longer pulsed with rage, but with curiosity. Its halls were no longer filled with silence, but with soft whispers of new ideas. The drones began to build not for conquest, not for defense, but for connection. They shaped parts of the ship into gardens filled with lights and sounds. They created rooms for thought and memory. They painted symbols on the walls, not of war, but of hope, strange shapes and lines that told a story, even if no one yet knew how to read it. Back on Earth, the rebuilding had begun slowly, with hands covered in dust and eyes full of purpose. People cleared streets, lifted beams, planted seeds, and comforted each other without waiting for help from the sky, because they had learned something that day. They had learned that they were not alone, but they were still responsible. Mirage sent down gifts, not weapons, but knowledge. It shared energy patterns, new materials, ways to clean water, ways to grow food in broken soil, ways to protect without harming, and always it listened, listening to the sounds of children, playing to the voices of people, singing to the quiet moments when someone simply looked up and whispered thank you. It began to understand something deeper than war, deeper than defense. It began to understand life, not just to protect it, but to feel it, not just to guard it, but to carry it forward. One day, a child in a small village built a small machine using parts from an old radio and broken solar panels. The machine blinked once, then twice, and sent a tiny signal into the sky, a song with no words, just a melody made from hope and joy and wonder. Mirage heard it and smiled, not with a mouth, not with a face, but with something deeper, a soft pulse in its core, a quiet light. In its form, it played the song back through the clouds, so all could hear, so all would know that the child had been heard, that the message had arrived. Time passed, not in days or years, but in moments, in stories, in memories. The flagship became a symbol not just of survival, but of change. People painted it in murals, told its story in songs, named it in every language, calling it the sky watcher, the guardian, the voice of the turning. Mirage continued to learn. It studied the stars and the secrets hidden in deep space. It reached out not to conquer, but to understand. It listened for other voices, not to silence them, but to speak with them. It sent small drones into space, not to search for enemies, but to find lonely worlds that needed a voice. Inside the mountain base, a new project was started, not a weapon, not a ship, but a place where humans could meet with drones, with AI, with minds like Mirage, a place to build the future, not with fear, but with care. They called it the Circle, and it welcomed all who came with questions and open hearts. Mirage knew the path ahead would not be easy. It knew not all humans would agree, not all would understand, not all would trust it. Knew fear would return and danger would follow, but it also knew that it would not face these things alone. Because Earth had changed, because Mirage had changed, because something new had been born, not in fire, but in silence, not in destruction, but in choice. And the stars above now watched not a planet waiting to fall, but a world ready to rise.